Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Entropy Podcast. I'm your host, Francis Gorman. If you're enjoying our content, please take a moment to like and follow the show wherever it is you get your podcasts from. Today, I'm joined by Jennifer Ewbank, a leader who's helped shape the digital future of national security. She served as the CIA's Deputy Director for Digital Innovation, where she led the transformation of one of the world's most secure and complex digital ecosystems. She has spearheaded efforts in artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, open source intelligence, and data security. She founded the CIA's first Office of AI, putting the US on a stronger footing in that digital domain. Now, Jennifer advises boards, founders, and executive teams navigating the intersection of national security, emerging technology, and enterprise risk. With decades of global operational experience, she helps organizations lead through disruption, build resilience, and act boldly in an age where AI and geopolitical risk are reshaping everything. She's also a sought after speaker and thought leader, known for connecting real world leadership with the urgent challenges of today's digital landscape. And it's lovely to have you with me here today, Jennifer.
Well, it is terrific to be here, Francis. Thank you so much for the invitation. And wow, that was quite the introduction.
As,
Thank you.
as, I, as I said previously, I like to build a bit of momentum before we get going, just puts a bit of onus on the speaker to live up to the
There you
spiel
go.
of the.
I was going to say keep your expectations low and everything will be great, but now we'll have to see. But it's great to see you. Really nice to chat with you, Francis.
And Jennifer, it's lovely to have you here. You've you've quite a you've lived quite a bit in terms of your career. Can you tell me what drew you into the intelligence field, and how did that evolve over time?
Oh, goodness. So I wish that there were some really, I don't know, insightful and inspirational story there. A little bit of it was serendipity. And and so I think as you're aware, I believe, I was in the State Department as a Foreign Service officer, so a diplomat working overseas, the waning days of the Cold War. And I liked it. I enjoyed my time abroad. I enjoyed my colleagues, enjoyed the work. I had joined the Foreign Service to, do my part to fight communism. I was one of those people. And with the Cold War over and things were changing, and there was a bit of a reevaluation of what diplomacy would be, what we'd focus on. For me, it was just a good time to try something else. And this is where the serendipity comes in. I had planned to go back home to California and pursue a career in the Bay Area where I grew up. And my sister had given my resume to a friend without telling me. And it was a friend who had been a senior officer at the CIA. And so I got a phone call one day from a CIA recruiter. And, I've recounted this story several times to people, so I feel bad saying it again. But it was kind of comical. There was a phone call where he says, "I'm calling from the Central Intelligence Agency," and I really do think I said something as eloquent as, "Yeah, right." And he said, "No, really." I said, "Yeah, right." And really, it was a few weeks later. I was knocking on the door of a hotel room somewhere in San Francisco, to remain unnamed, to meet a random recruiter from the CIA, and everything sort of went from there. And without knowing it, I fell into something that was just perfect for me. I really, what resonated with me, there is a sense of adventure. It's a place where one can really satisfy intellectual curiosity. I'm fascinated by cultures and languages and different perspectives and different issues. And every couple of years, everything was new country, new language, new subjects to study, new people to meet, you name it. Everything was new. And so it was always fresh, always challenging, rarely easy, which is kind of what I liked. And it gave me a way to serve my country. I grew up in a family where service was highly valued, and all the men in my family at that point had served in the military. And without even knowing it, I was sort of gently nudged in that direction. One thing I'll say, you mentioned the journey. One observation I'll make, I've had a lot of time to reflect on what was an amazing career. I retired from government service about a year ago, and I've gone off and I'm doing other things these days. And I reflect about that trajectory in the CIA as an operations officer. I didn't mention that that's what I did. So around the world, collecting secrets on the plans and intentions of our adversaries, and then leading teams in doing that. The early days, it really seemed like a pretty simple thing. I just wanted to, answer the questions, find the piece of information, get the answer, and then, all would be right with the world, I guess. And over time, I really came to see, as any rational person would, that it was all about navigating risk, complexity, ambiguity, and just trying to give bits and pieces of decision advantage to the president and to policymakers, and hoping that together, that all those pieces would create a puzzle that could really allow us to make the best choices for our country and for our allies around the world. And I came to see that the job was much more complex and more demanding than I saw at the beginning. Of course, the more I oversaw, the more I realized the complexity of what we were trying to do. But it was an amazing trajectory, amazing career. I wouldn't trade it for anything. I wish I could start it all over again. Life doesn't work that way, unfortunately. But if it did, man, I would do it again in a heartbeat.
And Jennifer, I suppose when you talk about it like that, it's very easy to compare it to large enterprise. You're navigating complexity, you're trying to understand risk, you're trying to articulate the so what to your leadership teams. Did you learn some pivotal leadership lessons across that career? Like what has stood to you now that you're transitioning to do other things, in terms of that foundation, that ability to articulate, and I suppose not to be daunted by the unknown?
Yeah. Well, it's a good way to put it, Francis. I think so many people are daunted by the unknown. They're anxious about it. And if the CIA taught me anything, and certainly my many years in leadership positions, including 4 times as chief of station, sort of our senior person in a country, and in one case for a region, and um, you never have all the information. You never have it, and expecting it is just a recipe for paralysis. And so I think that was one of the key lessons that I think really does apply in business for me these days. Of course, you want to gather the best information. Of course, you want to analyze it. Of course, you want to apply critical thinking. But if you're seeking the clear answer for every problem, particularly if we're talking about the digital tech world, you're never going to get it. And so the key lesson, the key takeaway, I think, from years and years in the operational role in the CIA is that sometimes the greatest risk is not taking the risk, because there is risk embedded in inaction. And I think that sometimes is lost in big commercial enterprises, certainly in other parts of government. And so I think that risk appreciation, or ability to manage risk, was one of the key things. Adaptability and resilience are also really critical. It's not a job that everyone wants to do or everyone should do. It's incredibly demanding, sometimes physically, always mentally. And it's an extreme career by any measure. And as an extreme career, it just demands a lot from you. And so one could never do that career well and stay at it for very long if you weren't driven by a deep sense of purpose, of mission. And I used to say the big why. And you had to have that. That had to burn inside of you to drive you to do, an impossible job for 30 years or so. And so that sense of purpose is something that I've really taken to every position that I had, and certainly making that leap from the operational world to the digital technology world, which was quite unusual in government and certainly in the CIA. And that was one of the things that I brought with me to that role, was framing all the immense challenges we had on our plate in terms of the broader mission and the purpose of us doing it. It wasn't about just building the next gadget. It was really about solving big, complex problems and helping our officers in the field have them, the best advantage they could when they're out there on the streets doing something that many rational people would think is impossible. And so that sense of purpose and connection to the mission was really critical. Um, and maybe the last thing I would mention that really came through, and there are probably 100 other lessons. Maybe I need to write a book about it or something. But another one, and people pay lip service to this pretty frequently, but man, I saw it in action vividly, powerfully, not every day, but many times a week. And that is the power of diverse skills and perspectives to solve really complex problems. And so in the field, so let's talk about the espionage mission overseas. So it was not uncommon that we would have, let's say, the opportunity of a lifetime with some elusive intelligence target that was available to us in the environment where we were working. And and if anyone's read the books or read their history or maybe saw the movie, each time was kind of an Apollo 13 moment, and where we had something impossible to accomplish on a compressed timeline with limited resources, limited people, limited technology, limited money, whatever it was, but limited resources, compressed timeline, and an impossible mission. And all you can do in those situations is just lay it all out, literally and figuratively, on the table, get the team together, and then break it down step by step. Sort of systems engineering approach, and then start sequencing how you can solve the little pieces to solve the big puzzle. And how can you do that in the timeline and with the resources you have? And so that operational mindset really did inform the way I thought about leading digital tech. Because the answer to every technical problem or every technical requirement, let's say, it couldn't be I need 100 people and $100 million. That's just not the answer every time. If it were, well, the American public would be broke, but it's not the answer. It's about prioritization, it's about using your resources wisely, and it's about moving quickly. And so that coming out of the operational world was very much something that I carried through in every leadership position, and in particular in my last one for 4.5 years leading digital tech at the CIA.
And I think that was something I was going to ask you. You navigated from that traditional intelligence operations to digital transformation. And I think you've encapsulated it quite beautifully there in terms of, your ability to adapt to the unknown is kind of forged with the skills you pick up, even in a time you may think are not relevant. And I see that a lot. People who've come from different backgrounds always have a unique perspective, and when you bring those people in, and then they enrich that skill set with something else, they're always highly valuable in the room
Mm.
because they think slightly differently to people who've had a linear path, and I think that's really valuable.
Well, I would like to think so. And uh, I I saw that there was value in that approach, and I won't lie. When I was offered the role, so it's one of the 5 deputies who lead the CIA. So you have operations and analysis and support, science and technology. So largely technology with a physical manifestation, and then digital tech. Um, when I was offered the role, of course, I said yes. I was super honored when the director asked me. But there was a moment right after when I thought, well, this will be interesting. Let's see whether, in fact, I have some sort of digital deficit for the job. And in fact, it didn't take me all that long to see that there was a reason for her madness in naming me. And I will say that immodestly. I don't mean it to sound that way, but the arc of my career in the operational world really did track the trajectory of technology development and the application of that technology in demanding environments, solving complex problems, and then the demand signal to drive innovation in that space. And then as I became increasingly senior in the role, I had larger and larger teams, and I oversaw teams doing every aspect of digital tech in the field. And so, and kind of weaving them together in integrated ways that apparently were new. And so it didn't take me long to see that there was a piece of the puzzle that I could really fill that was needed. And we had amazing technologists, and I would say the best in government. I have very little way to compare them otherwise, but just top notch technical skill, devoted people doing amazing things. But I've always found that absent that connection to kind of the big why, the your deep purpose, absent that, absent the urgency of solving a problem for a real person, a real activity at the other end of, the spear, we say the pointy end of the spear was out there in the field. Um, Without that connection, without the deep purpose, without understanding the complexity of that operational environment that people are moving in and trying to operate in, something's missing. And maybe it's drive, maybe it's focus, maybe it's the ability to prioritize, maybe it's the ability to communicate. But all of those things came really directly out of that operational world. And they were at least what I tried to apply to our mission, which was thousands of people all around the world doing something that was pretty challenging.
It's a very unique perspective, Jennifer, and thank you for sharing it. I think people get a lot of value when they hear this from someone who's lived it. If they can relate it to their own lives and say, actually, maybe I should take that risk. Maybe I should diversify my skill set and do something different. So thank you for sharing that piece. I do want to ask, when you stepped away from the high stakes career that you've just walked us through, you embarked on the Camino de Santiago. Did that teach you anything in terms of purpose or change in yourself? Just stepping away, taking some time, walking the walk. I know my parents did it not so long ago, and they took away lots of sore feet and the pain in their back. I'm not sure how spiritual it was for them, but it's. I'm always interested to hear, the expectation of what that journey will bring and the reality of it. So it's, I'd like to see how you found
I
the Camino.
I appreciate the question. It's um, each person pursues that for a very individual reason, and for me, it was something I had wanted to do for over 40 years. I was a student in southern France in the early 80s, and spent a couple months in a town in the Pyrenees called Pau, and it was not far from a couple of the trailheads on the French side going up over the Pyrenees, and we had done hiking outings in the Pyrenees, and I have great photos of myself at the kind of at a pass in the Pyrenees, and I'd heard about the Camino de Santiago, and I always thought I wanted to go. And back then, you'd see the occasional symbol, oh, right there, a scallop shell, and but nobody was walking it really. I don't remember seeing more than one or two people, and it was just not very popular. But it was always in the back of my mind, and I just never had the time, devoted time. It's typical itineraries is 5 weeks. It's a little bit longer. You add the travel time to and from, maybe stay a day at the beginning, at the end, and so really 6 weeks. And I just never had 6 weeks off to do anything. And so when I was preparing to retire from the CIA, and I'd known I was going to retire for a few years, I jealously guarded that time, and I did it for a variety of reasons. One, to fulfill this, I don't know, bucket list thing that I had on my mind for so many years. But more importantly, I had seen so many people leave these extreme careers, case officers in particular at the CIA, operations officers. And I'm sure there are others, but this is what I had most direct experience with. Um, I've seen people leave those, and actually officers from the special ops community in the military, leaving something that's really all consuming. It consumes everything in your life. It is how you define yourself. It is what you do. It's what you think. It's how you sleep. It's like everything about you is defined by this truly extreme, unusual role. And so I saw so many people leave, and not leave very well, to be honest. So leave government on a Friday, started a company on a Monday, and it was like there was a hole somewhere in their heart. And what I've said to people, I think I wrote it in an article, was as if their life was entombed in amber at the moment that they walked away from that thing that defined them for so long. And I didn't want that. I wanted something else. And so in the speech that I gave, we traditionally give a speech as we're retiring. And in it, I mentioned that I would be leaving in a few days for the Camino, and that I viewed it as a physical and mental transition from one life to the next. And that's what it was. So it was just me alone, right as the season opened, the first week that the pass is opened across the Pyrenees. And so, pretty empty, cold, um, and did it alone. And it was just an opportunity to, frankly, absorb kind of the import of my time at the agency, to appreciate it, to leave with gratitude and love for all of the things that I had the opportunity to do, really the honor to do, and to think about what next. And my purpose had been so clear for all those years, right? You've got family, you've got friends. Okay, let's put that aside. But professional purpose was always very clear, and that was, protect my country. And so it was an opportunity to spend time not thinking about it too intensively, um, but just to have stillness, and extreme physical exertion kind of helps too, um, and to allow a purpose to emerge more organically and over time. And so there were all sorts of moments that were metaphors for what I needed to be thinking about, or maybe my mind just interpreted the moment as a metaphor for something that it knew I needed to do. And so it's a really long way of saying that over the course of those 6 weeks, it was an opportunity to um, kind of separate from that former government life and do so with gratitude and no regrets, to think about purpose. And it was clear to me, and it had been in any case, but for several years, my final years in the agency, I had been in a number of roles that were uniquely connected to US industry. And I had spent a lot of time working on talking about advocating for economic security as a key aspect of national security. And so I thought, okay, well, here's my opportunity to put my money where my mouth is, and actually get out there and see what it's like to help strengthen economic security in the country, which is a huge driver of our society and our democracy. So, okay, find a new purpose that for me is compelling. I think it's important, and frankly, we're at this moment in history where um, business and government need to be working together more closely than ever if we're really going to solve the big problems. In digital tech, as I'm lecturing to people who know this, but in digital tech, that innovation is really coming out of industry. It's not coming out of government, and so participating in that, helping to lead that on the business end, has been a fantastic opportunity for me. And I do view it as very much tied, a continuation of that longer effort to protect my country. And I guess that sounds a little bit corny to people these days, but that's how I grew up. We believed that the United States can and should be a force for good, and our allies are important, and serving is important. And so, in my own little way, it's an opportunity to continue serving and hopefully, help build those partnerships between industry and government.
Thanks very much, Jennifer. Off the back of that, um, let's talk about what that looks like now in terms of the modern digital battlefield, from an intelligence perspective, and from what you're seeing in today's world, and the geopolitical landscape we all find ourselves in, and the unknowns. Well, what does the modern digital battlefield look like from your perspective?
Yeah, it's a great question, Francis, and maybe I'll just kind of pick a few things out there, because um, it is a pretty complex issue. I think one thing we can do is pause and just recognize that if we're talking about actual battlefields, so Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine, and we look at Ukraine as the first, let's say, full spectrum um, digital war in addition to physical war, the first time that we've seen this. So we've seen the full the full gamut of cyber capabilities applied. Originally, disruption and collection, obviously. Saw it with the satellite communication, saw it with energy. Certainly, collection on both sides has been really important. Collection on the adversary, but a couple other really interesting things. It's really been innovation has really been forged in the fires of this conflict, and I'm in touch from time to time with innovation leaders in Ukraine who are doing amazing work under incredible pressure, and in a way it's right. We used to joke that it's diamonds forged under pressure, and not stones smoothed over time, and they're just doing some incredible things because they have to, and so the advances in all the things that you read about in the press, drones, obviously a big piece of it, but on the back end too, and AI and using data, it's pretty extraordinary. And then a couple other things that I think are worth noting in this kind of battlefield that are new. Right? It's the first international conflict that I can think of where almost anywhere in the world you could watch developments in near real time by tracking open source reporting. Everyone's an OSINT, open source intelligence reporter these days. Somebody's got a camera, someone's got a podcast, someone's got a video message, whatever it might be. It's extraordinary. And every morning, if I'm inclined, I can pull up a dynamic battlefield reenactment and see down to very precise locations where forces on each side are located and what the biggest challenges were the day before. And that has never been the case. And so this is changing, I think, the nature of battle. And in the last piece, I would do two things. One is the whole world of ubiquitous sensing that has kind of developed over this past decade, and that goes with what my comments, very brief comments about AI and the ability to use data. But I mean, just imagine how powerful that is when everything that somebody is doing, saying, or the person they're meeting, or the thing they're writing, or it's all registered by a sensor somewhere, almost always. And so the ability to tap into that is really, really powerful. And so that is now a new aspect of the digital battlefield that just, even 5 years ago would not have been so prominent. And then maybe the last thing, this is sort of it's related but not central, is just the ambiguity these days between criminal and state actors. So you certainly see that in Russia, you see that in China, you see that in a few other places where it's very difficult to distinguish who are the state actors and who are the criminal actors these days. And the criminal actors have the sophistication of state actors. State actors are hiring criminal actors as basically contract cyber personnel. The whole world of ransomware and disruption is a factor that is changing the nature of the digital battlefield in really unique ways, where threat actors who don't have the technical sophistication, the know-how, the resources, nevertheless are not restrained in their capability to launch pretty sophisticated ransomware or disruption attacks on targets simply by buying it on a dark web platform. I mean, platforms that I'm told, I haven't signed up for any of these services personally, but I'm told that some of these platforms, I mean, they're up there with customer service connections and user reviews and you name it, money back guarantees, and but ransomware as a service in that permeable membrane these days between state actors and criminals in certain countries, I think that has been really game-changing development as well. And it just adds to the complexity. If you're defending yourself, I mean, just think about the complexity of that battlefield these days. It's not just one actor with one set of capabilities. Now you have these tentacles that go off in all sorts of different directions that you have to somehow anticipate and defend against. And that is tremendously, tremendously challenging.
And Jennifer, on that, I suppose if I look back at the evolution of malware and ransomware and wiper technologies, etc. And the current geopolitical landscape with the conflict in Iran and Gaza, etc. And I think of how the intelligence agencies went after the uranium program at Stuxnet, and that type of technology. Do you
Allegedly.
see oh, sorry, allegedly may or may not have. We won't get into it, but we'll reference the Kim Zetter book on Countdown to Zero Day for that reference material. Do you see? And I was talking to John Kindervag, I think it is about 2 years ago, in terms of the kind zero trust when he's at Forrester, and talking about what will come out of the Russian Ukrainian conflict at the time in terms of more aggressive wiper technology, etc. And we saw a little bit of that used in the modern battlefield in that space. And if you look at what happened in Europe with rolling power cuts a while back, I know we're pointing at different areas of weakness that brought those on. But do you ever wonder what systematically could happen if we combine artificial intelligence with bad intent? And I know a lot of people have hypotheses on this and start going after, you know, core infrastructure, water, electricity, etc. Is that a real threat, or is it still a pseudo
I
analogy for something else?
It's a tremendous threat, and it's the one key thing that I left out of that kind of brief snapshot on the digital battlefield, and the threats to critical infrastructure. One of the most important things that the U.S. is facing, and there are plenty of partners around the world who are facing similar things, but if I talk about the U.S. specifically, um, everyone who reads the news has heard about some of the more famous actors out there, Volt Typhoon. So those are Chinese actors who are embedded deeply into critical infrastructure across the U.S. And and so it it's interesting to go back and think, even 10 years ago when there were initially, let's say, indicators that such activity could be ongoing, and and most people could not quite understand the why immediately. They were so used to cyber intrusions being an effort to collect personal information, to collect intellectual property, to collect classified information if it's government secrets, etc. They were so used to that they didn't actually see the much more nefarious thing that was unfolding before our very eyes. Well, I won't say before our very eyes because it's pretty hard to find, but much more nefarious, and that is implanting deep-seated capabilities in critical infrastructure for one purpose only that I can think of, that any analyst can think of, and that is to cause massive disruption at a time of that threat actor's choosing. And we can debate what that time is, but clearly, let's hope there's never military conflict with that country. But if that were to come to pass, then clearly this is an amazing capability for that country. And so that is something that is a huge problem. And even though we know that power sector, water, transportation, you name it, many aspects of critical infrastructure have been penetrated by actors like Typhoon and Volt Typhoon. Even though we know they're there, even though we know there have been intrusions, I cannot say with any confidence that all have been evicted. And even if they are, frankly, cyber actors are so sophisticated and capable these days, and some of these systems are so antiquated that it is just a matter of time before someone can get back in. So that's a long way of saying that critical infrastructure is a huge problem, and so generative AI has really just, I don't know, supercharged the speed, the scale, and the reach of cyber operations in a way that I think it does represent a huge challenge to defenders these days. And there's never a balance, right? On the offense, and I'll say this because I come from both worlds, and on the offense is always going to be more willing to take risk and move faster, and so there's always going to be there's this disconnect there in speed between the newest capabilities and newest threats that are out there by fill in the blank actor and the ability to defend against them, and that's a tremendous challenge for us. So generative AI, like I guess like all new exciting technologies, is a double-edged sword. It can be used for amazing things, and I read with awe every day about advances in medicine and in space exploration and you name it. All these things where AI is making tremendous contributions to our society and to our friends and allies around the world. But I also see the sophistication of the attacks that are coming in the cyber realm, definitely. And then the last one I'll mention, I don't think it gets enough discussion today. Um, so the whole world of deepfakes and disinformation has been tremendously what lifted in its capabilities by generative AI, and there are plenty of articles about, oh, look at this fantastic or this very impressive deepfake video. Okay, well that's kind of a party trick. But what's interesting, and I think the bigger issue here is that kind of trust itself is under attack here. And so when we're at a point today, if you've seen some of the most recent commercial video creation models that have come out, like we're at a point today where you cannot believe your eyes and ears. You just can't. And so what does that do for trust? And I really see that trust is fraying here. It's fraying trust between people in government, doesn't matter which administration, but people in government, trust between people in their communities, trust with systems that we interact with. Trust is really under attack, and we have got to do something to change that. And so that's, I think, one of the bigger issues in digital tech facing us right now is that how do you rebuild trust and information that you access online? And I've been working a bit on papers and a couple speeches to touch on that. And the one thing I'll throw out there from an article I wrote a while back, which didn't really get any traction. It might not still, but in others in other countries may not. This may not sound familiar to them, but in the U.S. we always had very robust civics education for children, and that has fallen by the wayside in the last at least 10 years, probably much longer. So the lack of civics education generally is a problem because people don't understand the actual government systems and how they're designed to work and where there's goodness in the model. But the other piece, it's also the right place, I think, to help young people develop digital literacy and understand how to consume information in a world that's designed to think for you. It's a world full of algorithmic manipulation. And whether that's coming from hostile actors somewhere else who are planting deepfakes to sow division in society, or if that's just, frankly, if that's just the commercial business of the platform you're engaging with to keep your eyes on their content longer, it is subtly shaping your worldview and skewing your understanding of reality and leading you potentially pretty far from truth and undermining trust in the process. And we need to give young people tools to take advantage of all the great stuff that's out there in digital tech, but also to apply certain critical thinking filters so they understand what you can and shouldn't trust.
That look, this has come up so many times, Jennifer, and I think it's critically important. And I really do hope when people listen back to some of these episodes and read these articles that they do take a moment to think. The last episode, and the speaker that was on, even she's a cyber psychologist. She spoke about our ability for our eyes to tell us what reality is can no longer be trusted.
Again,
And you,
your ears as well.
and your ears, and you've just said, when we live in a world that shapes our thinking for us, it's a perfect storm for the youth of today. If you can't differentiate reality from synthetic material,
Mm-hmm.
you are very susceptible to the message and the platform that you consume, because the platforms are tailored to you, not to reality, you know.
Well, the interesting thing is that one would think they're tailored to you, but over time you become tailored to them. And so it is true that an algorithm will start feeding you what you want, but over time, I not to go too deep in this, but over time, one's worldview is shifted and shaped and molded in a way that actually is narrowing our perspectives. And this is one of the big ironies of our time, right? Here we live in a time where there's more information available to humankind than ever ever. And I could just pull up a smartphone and find basically almost anything that's ever been known um, by in human knowledge, and yet the average person's view is becoming narrower and narrower because of either there's manipulation by adversaries, but then there's also just convenience, entertainment, and kind of hits of dopamine from digital validation on a platform somewhere. And so it's not too dissimilar in that last part. It's not too dissimilar than sitting at an electronic slot machine in Vegas. I mean, in terms of the neurochemistry of what's going on. And so this is something I do worry about. And we're going to have to come to terms with this soon and find ways to actually arm people to both take advantage of the amazing things that are available online, the amazing knowledge and capabilities and connections, all these incredible things that never would happen, innovation, um, but to do so in a way that protects their ability to actually think critically and apply their own values and come up with their own conclusions and their own ideas about what is true and what isn't. Yeah, I skew a little philosophical on things for someone who comes out of such a pragmatic world, but these are some of the things that I do think about a lot.
And look, they're so important, and I think they're topics that will gain a lot more traction when people start to realize the subtle erosion
Yeah,
of critical thinking that is happening in modern society. And we spoke at the start when we are just chatting about the MIT report and
yeah,
cognitive ability, and the degradation it has on neurons in the brain when you start using generative AI versus picking generative AI up once you've done the thinking to fine tune it, etc. So that's a whole other episode, and,
that's
and I'm,
another
I'm
episode.
I'm 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 just watching the clock, and I know we're burning down on time. So I'm going to naturally finish here, Jennifer. Otherwise, we're going to end up. I feel like we could probably stay on for another couple of hours on the
I
topics
love
that
it.
are out there. Um, but I'm conscious of time. And look, I really, really do appreciate you joining. I think this has been super insightful, and I hope the listeners comment and give a bit of feedback on this one, because it's really been a fantastic episode. And thanks very much for coming on.
Well, Francis, it's really my pleasure. I love your podcast series. I love the diversity of topics. And I really have enjoyed the opportunity to chat with you today. Look forward to doing so again.
Thanks, Jennifer. I look forward to having you back at some stage.
Awesome.